The glass doors of Luxe Haven slid open with a soft hiss, welcoming Lila Jackson into a world that gleamed with wealth and whispers of exclusivity. Nestled in the heart of Atlanta's Buckhead district, the upscale boutique was a shrine to luxury. Marble floors shimmered under golden chandeliers, and racks of designer garments stood like silent sentinels of status. Lila, dressed in faded jeans and a simple black tee, stepped inside with a quiet confidence that belied her casual attire. She wasn't here to shop, not in the way the other patrons might assume. She was the new owner, though no one in the store knew it yet. This visit was her chance to see the place through unfiltered eyes, to peel back the polished veneer and uncover the truth beneath. From behind the sleek counter, Ethan Carver's sharp gaze swept the room. The manager, a wiry man in his early 40s with slick-back hair and a tailored suit, flashed a practiced smile at a well-dressed couple browsing cashmere coats. His voice dripped with charm as he suggested a $2,000 jacket, his hands gesturing with the precision of a salesman who knew his audience. Then his eyes landed on Lila. For a split second they lingered, assessing, dismissing, before flicking back to the couple. To Ethan, she was invisible, a shadow in a space meant for the elite. Lila felt the familiar sting of that look, but she swallowed it down, her fingers brushing a silk scarf as she began her silent observation. Ethan's focus remained glued to the couple, his laughter ringing out as he handed them a glossy shopping bag, the Luxe Haven logo glinting in the light. Lila moved deeper into the store, her sneakers silent against the marble. She paused at a display of evening gowns, their fabrics cascading like liquid starlight. Her hand hovered over a ruby-red dress, the price tag dangling like a taunt. 5 figures, a small fortune. She didn't flinch. She could buy the whole rack if she wanted, but that wasn't the point today. She was here to watch, to see how Ethan ran her store, a business she'd fought tooth and nail to acquire. As she lingered, she caught the subtle shift in the air, the way the sales staff orbited the right customers, offering flutes of champagne to a woman in pearls while ignoring a young man in a hoodie near the accessories. Ethan's world had rules, unspoken but ironclad, and Lila didn't fit them. She saw it in the way he glanced at her again, this time with a flicker of irritation, his lips tightening as if her presence offended the store's pristine order. He didn't approach, didn't offer the warm greeting he'd lavished on the couple. Instead, he turned his back, signaling to a clerk to keep an eye on her. Lila's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. This was just the beginning. She'd seen enough to know what came next. Lila Jackson drifted through the aisles of Luxe Haven, her fingers grazing the cool silk of a sapphire blue gown as she took in the store's rhythm. The air buzzed with quiet wealth, soft chatter, the clink of champagne glasses, the rustle of tissue paper as purchases were wrapped. But beneath the polish, she felt the undercurrent of exclusion, sharp and cold. Ethan Carver's presence loomed like a gatekeeper, his attention fixed on customers who matched his vision of prestige. Lila watched as he ushered the well-dressed couple toward a private fitting room, his voice smooth as velvet, promising them the world. Meanwhile, she stood alone, a ghost in her own domain. Her eyes caught a flicker of movement near the counter. Maya Torres, a young sales associate with dark curls and a nervous smile, glanced her way. Maya's hands fidgeted with a stack of receipts, her gaze darting between Lila and Ethan as if torn. Lila offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement, but Maya quickly looked away, her shoulders hunching under the weight of unspoken rules. Then Ethan's head turned. His stare landed on Lila again, harder this time, his brow creasing as she lingered near a rack of tailored blazers. "Excuse me," he called, his tone clipped and dripping with false courtesy. "Are you sure you're finding what you need? We've got some more affordable options near the front." The words hung heavy, a quiet jab masked as help. Ethan's words sliced through the hum of Luxe Haven, sharp enough to draw the eyes of a few nearby customers. Lila paused, her hand still resting on the blazer's sleeve, and turned to face him. His smile was thin, a brittle mask that didn't reach his pale blue eyes. "I'm just looking," she replied, her voice steady as stone, though inside the old wound of being judged flared hot. She'd heard lines like that before, Too many times, in places where her skin and her simplicity marked her as an outsider. But this wasn't just any place. This was her store, and Ethan's casual disdain stung deeper because of it. He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble, his posture stiff with authority. "Well," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "we've got exclusive pieces here. Not everything's in everyone's range, if you catch my drift." The implication landed like a slap. "You don't belong," and Lila's pulse quickened. She saw Maya wince from the corner of her eye, the young woman's hands freezing mid-task, her face a mix of guilt and fear. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy sizing Lila up, his gaze flicking over her jeans and sneakers with a faint smirk. "I'm fine," Lila said, her calm a shield against his arrogance. But as she turned back to the rack, she felt his shadow linger, a warning that this wasn't over. He was watching her now, and she knew what came next. Lila Jackson stood her ground in the heart of Luxe Haven, the soft glow of chandeliers casting shadows across her determined face. She'd moved toward the back of the store, where a velvet rope cordoned off the most exclusive items. Handbags studded with crystals, dresses that shimmered like midnight skies. Her fingers brushed a leather clutch, testing its weight, when Ethan Carver's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Miss," he said, his tone sharp and stripped of its earlier pretense, "I'm going to need you to step away from there." His footsteps echoed as he closed the distance, his slicked-back hair catching the light, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Lila turned slowly, meeting his gaze with a calm that unsettled him. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice low but firm, inviting him to explain. Ethan straightened, puffing out his chest as if the store's prestige rested on his shoulders alone. "This section's reserved for our high-end clientele," he snapped, his words loud enough to turn heads. A few customers paused, their shopping bags crinkling as they watched. "I'm sure you understand." His smirk returned, smug and biting, as if he'd already won. Lila's lips twitched, not in amusement, but in disbelief. "And how do you decide who's high-end?" she pressed, her tone even but edged with steel. Ethan faltered for a heartbeat, caught off guard by her directness, but his arrogance quickly flared back to life. Ethan's face flushed a faint red, his composure slipping as Lila's question hung in the air. "Look," he said, his voice rising, "I don't mean anything by it. We've had issues before. People touching things they can't afford, even taking stuff." His eyes darted to the growing audience, a mix of curiosity and discomfort flickering across their faces. Lila crossed her arms, her stance unwavering. "So you think I'm here to steal something?" she asked, her words slow and deliberate, each one a quiet challenge. Ethan shifted, his polished shoes scuffing the marble, but he didn't back down. "I didn't say that," he shot back, though his tone betrayed him. "But I've got a job to do. I can't let just anyone wander around back here." The store fell silent, the hum of wealth replaced by a thick electric tension. Maya Torres hovered near the counter, her hands clenched, her dark eyes wide with dread. Ethan's accusation wasn't just a jab. It was a line crossed, and Lila felt it like a spark igniting years of buried anger. Yet she held steady, refusing to give him the outburst he seemed to crave. "I'm not breaking any rules," she said, her voice cutting through the hush. "I'm a customer. Same as them." She nodded toward the onlookers, some whispering now, others staring. Ethan's jaw tightened, his patience fraying. "If you don't leave," he hissed, "I'll call security." Lila's eyes flashed. She wasn't going anywhere. The air in Luxe Haven crackled as Ethan Carver's threat lingered, his finger hovering over the radio clipped to his belt. Lila Jackson stood rooted to the spot, her brown eyes locked on his, unflinching despite the sting of his words. The crowd of customers had thickened, their whispers buzzing like static, some judgmental, others intrigued. Ethan's face twisted with a mix of triumph and irritation, his voice booming for effect. "You've got 10 seconds to leave, or security hauls you out," he barked, stepping closer as if to crowd her toward the door. Lila's heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been dismissed by his kind. She took a slow breath, her calm a stark contrast to his bluster. Call them, she said, her tone flat but daring him to follow through. Ethan hesitated, his bravado flickering, but then he pressed the button, muttering a curt order into the radio. Two guards appeared moments later, their broad shoulders filling the aisle, uncertainty etched on their faces. "Ma'am," one said, almost apologetic, "we need you to go." Lila nodded once, her gaze never leaving Ethan's smug grin. She turned toward the exit, her steps deliberate, feeling the weight of every eye on her back. As the glass doors slid shut behind her, she pulled out her phone and dialed Calvin Reed. "It's time," she said, her voice steel. "We're coming back." Outside Luxe Haven, the humid Atlanta air clung to Lila Jackson as she stood on the bustling Buckhead sidewalk, the store's glowing windows reflecting the chaos she left behind. She gripped her phone, Calvin's steady voice crackling through the line. "What happened?" he asked, concern sharpening his tone. Lila recounted the ordeal, Ethan's accusations, the public humiliation, the guards escorting her out like a criminal. "He thinks he won," she said, a bitter edge creeping into her words. "But he doesn't know who he's dealing with." Calvin chuckled darkly. "Oh, he's about to find out. I'll round up the team. Meet us at the office in 20. Lila slipped her phone into her pocket, her mind racing. She glanced back at the store, catching a glimpse of Ethan through the glass, laughing with a clerk as if nothing had happened. Her fists clenched. This wasn't just personal now. It was a mission. She'd bought Luxe Haven to prove a point, to turn a symbol of exclusion into something better, and Ethan had just handed her the perfect opening. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "That was wrong, what he did." Mrs. Evelyn Harper, a silver-haired woman in a silk scarf, stood nearby, her eyes misty with something like regret. Lila offered a tight smile. "It's not over," she said, her words a promise. As she walked to her car, determination burned brighter than the shame Ethan had tried to heap on her. Tomorrow she'd return, and everything would change. The sun dipped low over Atlanta, casting long shadows across Buckhead as Lila Jackson strode back toward Luxe Haven. Gone were the jeans and tee. Now she wore a tailored charcoal suit that hugged her frame like armor, her heels clicking with purpose against the pavement. Flanking her were Calvin Reed, his briefcase swinging confidently, and two sharply dressed associates, their faces set with determination. The glass doors loomed ahead, a portal to the reckoning she'd planned since Ethan's smug victory the day before. She'd spent the night with her team, plotting every move, turning humiliation into power. This wasn't just a return, it was a takeover. Inside, Ethan Carver leaned against the counter, joking with a clerk about yesterday's troublemaker, his laughter grating against the store's refined hum. The chime of the doors silenced him mid-sentence. His head snapped up and his smirk vanished as Lila stepped inside, her presence filling the space like a storm rolling in. Customers paused, sensing the shift, their shopping bags forgotten. Ethan blinked, recognition dawning too late. "You again," he stammered, straightening up, his voice thinner than he intended. Lila didn't flinch. She crossed the marble floor, stopping just feet from him, her eyes locked on his. "I'd like to speak to the owner," she said, her tone smooth but loaded with intent. Ethan's laugh was nervous, forced. "The owner? Lady, they don't have time for—" He stopped cold as Calvin stepped forward, a stack of papers in hand, and Lila's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. Ethan's words choked off as Lila Jackson's gaze bore into him, unyielding and fierce. The store's golden light seemed to dim under the weight of her silence. "Let me introduce myself," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm Lila Jackson, the new owner of Luxe Haven." The words landed like a thunderclap, reverberating off the marble walls. Ethan's jaw dropped, his face draining of color as if the floor had vanished beneath him. A gasp rippled through the staff. Maya Torres froze mid-step, her eyes wide with awe, while a few customers whispered, craning their necks to see. Ethan staggered back, his hand gripping the counter for support, his earlier arrogance crumbling into dust. Calvin Reed stepped up beside Lila, slapping the ownership documents onto the counter with a satisfying thud. "These are effective immediately," he said, his tone crisp and final. "Miss Jackson's been reviewing operations, and we've got some concerns. Starting with you." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed, a fish gasping for air. I didn't know, he sputtered, his voice trembling. Lila tilted her head, her expression unreadable. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like a person, she said, her words soft but piercing. She gestured to her team. We're here to discuss changes, effective now. Ethan's eyes darted around, seeking an escape that wasn't there. The room held its breath, waiting for Lila's next move, as Maya stepped forward, her quiet, thank you, barely audible, but heavy with meaning. Lila Jackson stood at the center of Luxe Haven, her tailored suit a stark contrast to the chaos she'd unleashed. Ethan Carver's world unraveled before her, his hands trembling as he stared at the ownership papers Calvin had slapped onto the counter. The store's usual hum was gone, replaced by a stunned silence that clung to every corner. Customers lingered near the racks, their curiosity pinning Ethan in place, while the staff, Maya included, watched with bated breath. Lila's voice broke the stillness, calm but unyielding. You had your chance yesterday, Ethan, she said. You chose to humiliate me instead of listening. Now you face the consequences. Ethan's eyes widened, panic flickering as he scrambled for words. Miss Jackson, I swear it was a mistake, he stammered, his slicked back hair falling into disarray as he ran a hand through it. I didn't mean any disrespect. Lila raised an eyebrow, her patience thinning. No disrespect, she echoed, her tone sharpening. You accused me of stealing, had me thrown out of my own store, all because I didn't fit your idea of high-end. That's not a mistake. It's who you are. Calvin slid a resignation form across the counter, his expression cold. You've got two options, Lila continued, crossing her arms. Step down as manager right now, or I fire you on the spot. Choose. Ethan's breath hitched, his face crumpling as the weight of her ultimatum sank in. The room tightened around him, waiting for his surrender. Ethan Carver's shoulders slumped, the last threads of his arrogance unraveling as Lila's words pinned him like a spotlight. The counter he'd once ruled now felt like a cage, the resignation form glaring up at him under the store's golden lights. Please, he whispered, his voice cracking. I've been here for years. I can change, I swear. Lila's gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of pity crossing her face, but it didn't waver her resolve. Change isn't a promise you make to me, she said quietly. It's something you prove. And right now, I can't trust you to help me build what this store needs to become. Her eyes swept the room, landing on Maya, who stood tall despite her trembling hands, and the other staff, their faces a mix of shock and quiet hope. Ethan swallowed hard, his pride warring with the inevitable. With a shaky hand, he took the pen Calvin offered, scribbling his name on the form as if signing away his identity. The scratch of ink was deafening in the silence. Done, Calvin said, collecting the papers with a nod. Ethan stumbled back, his eyes glassy, then turned toward the back of the store, his footsteps heavy with defeat. Lila exhaled, the tension easing from her shoulders. This place is ours now, she said, her voice steady but warm, directed at the team. Let's make it right. As Ethan disappeared, a new chapter loomed, fragile but full of possibility. The dust of Ethan's departure still hung in the air as Lila Jackson gathered the Luxe Haven staff around the marble counter, the store's golden light casting a warm glow over their uncertain faces. She stood tall, her suit jacket unbuttoned now, a symbol of the walls coming down. What you saw today wasn't just about one man, she began, her voice steady but rich with purpose. It was about a culture that's kept this place from being what it could be. Starting now, we're building something new, a store where everyone belongs. The team shifted, some nodding, others exchanging wary glances, the weight of change settling in. Maya Torres stepped forward, her dark curls bouncing as she clutched a notepad. Miss Jackson, she said, her voice soft but eager. I've got some ideas, ways to make this place more welcoming, maybe rearrange the layout, add local designs. Lila's eyes lit up, a smile breaking through her composed exterior. I'd love to hear them, Maya, she replied, gesturing for her to continue. The young woman hesitated, then launched into a pitch about wider aisles and spotlighting Atlanta artisans, her passion cutting through the room's tension. Calvin Reed leaned against a rack, arms crossed, a quiet grin on his face as he watched Lila take the reins. Your jobs are safe, Lila added, addressing the group. But I need you all in on this vision. Who's with me? Hands rose, tentative at first, then firm, a fragile unity taking root. The energy in Luxe Haven shifted as the staff's hands stayed raised, a silent pledge to Lila's vision. She nodded, her chest swelling with cautious hope. Good, she said, clapping her hands together. Tomorrow we start fresh. New policies, new priorities. Everyone gets a copy of the updated handbook tonight. Read it. Live it. Calvin handed out sleek packets, each page outlining a commitment to inclusivity. No more favoring the right customers, no more cold shoulders. The team murmured, some flipping through the pages with curiosity, others with faint unease. Change wasn't easy, and Lila knew it. She'd seen the flicker of doubt in their eyes, fear of losing the elite clientele that had defined the store's legacy. Maya lingered as the group dispersed, her notepad still clutched tight. I've seen how Ethan ran things, she confessed, her voice dropping. People like me, Latin young, got ignored unless we were serving. I want this to work. Lila squeezed her shoulder, a rare warmth softening her resolve. It will, she promised. You're part of this now, Maya. We all are. As the last staff member filed out, Calvin sidled up, his tone low. They're on board for now, but the real test comes when the regulars walk in. Lila's gaze drifted to the racks, the designer labels gleaming like old ghosts. Let them come, she said, steel creeping back into her voice. We're ready. Outside, Atlanta's lights twinkled, a city waiting to see if Luxe Haven could truly shine anew. The morning sun streamed through Luxe Haven's glass doors, illuminating the newly rearranged racks and the vibrant artwork from local Atlanta designers now gracing the walls. Lila Jackson stood near the counter, reviewing the day's schedule with Maya Torres, whose suggestions had already begun reshaping the store. The air felt lighter, the staff moving with a cautious optimism, until the doors chimed and Mrs. Evelyn Harper swept in. A Buckhead fixture in her silk scarf and pearls, she'd been a loyal customer for decades, her sharp tongue as legendary as her deep pockets. Today her eyes narrowed at a display of plus-size dresses, her lips pursing in disapproval. Good morning, Mrs. Harper, Lila greeted, her tone warm but firm, stepping forward to meet the storm she saw brewing. Evelyn didn't return the smile. What's this nonsense? She snapped, waving a manicured hand at the expanded sizing options. Luxe Haven used to mean exclusivity, class. Now you're letting anyone in? Her voice carried, drawing glances from other shoppers. Lila's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. We're still exclusive, she replied, in quality and experience. But luxury shouldn't mean locking people out. It's about making everyone feel valued. Evelyn scoffed, clutching her purse tighter. You've diluted the brand, she insisted, her tone icy. I won't shop where the prestige is gone. Maya shifted nervously behind the counter, her hands twisting, as Lila squared her shoulders. This was the test Calvin had warned her about, the old guard pushing back. Mrs. Evelyn Harper's words hung in the air, a challenge Lila Jackson couldn't ignore. The store's new energy faltered as customers paused, some nodding in silent agreement with Evelyn, others watching Lila with curiosity. Prestige isn't about exclusion, Lila said, her voice steady but rising to meet the moment. It's about how these clothes make you feel. Special, seen. We're elevating that for everyone. She gestured to a young woman nearby, beaming as she tried on a dress from the expanded line, her joy a quiet rebuke to Evelyn's scorn. For a heartbeat, Evelyn's gaze softened, caught off guard by the sight, but her resolve hardened again. I've spent thousands here, she retorted. I deserve better than this. Lila stepped closer, her eyes locking with Evelyn's. You deserve respect, and so does she said, nodding toward the young woman. Give us a chance to show you what this store can be. Evelyn hesitated, her anger wavering as the girl's laughter echoed softly. Then to everyone's surprise, she sighed, her shoulders dropping. Fine, she muttered, brushing past Lila to browse the new collection. But I'm not promising anything. Maya exhaled, a small smile breaking through her tension, while Lila watched Evelyn go, a spark of hope flickering. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a crack in the old wall, one she could widen. As the day rolled on, Lila knew tougher battles loomed, ones beyond customer complaints, lurking in the shadows of her supply chain. The hum of Luxe Haven had settled into a new rhythm, the staff adapting to Lila Jackson's vision with a mix of pride and growing pains. She sat in her small office above the sales floor, a cup of coffee cooling as she reviewed inventory plans for the upcoming eco-friendly collection, a cornerstone of the store's rebrand. The door creaked open, and Maya Torres slipped in, her usual spark dimmed by a furrowed brow. She clutched a stack of papers, her fingers tapping nervously against them. "Lila," she said, her voice tight, "we've got a problem with the green line supplier." Lila looked up, her stomach tightening at Maya's tone. "What kind of problem?" she asked, setting her pen down. Maya slid the papers across the desk, printouts of articles, blurry photos of overseas factories, and whistleblower reports. "They're not as ethical as they claim," she explained, pointing to a grainy image of cramped workers. "No fair wages, sketchy conditions. It's all greenwashing." Lila's eyes scanned the evidence, her jaw clenching as the words sank in. She'd staked so much on this collection. Sustainability was her promise to customers, a line in the sand against the industry's excesses. "How did we miss this?" she muttered, more to herself than Maya. The young woman shifted, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I dug deeper after a hunch," she admitted. "I should have checked sooner." Lila shook her head, her mind racing. This wasn't just a hiccup. It was a betrayal of everything she stood for. Lila Jackson leaned back in her chair, the supplier documents spread across her desk like a map of broken trust. The eco-friendly line's launch was weeks away, a tight deadline now shadowed by Maya's discovery. "This changes everything," Lila said, her voice low but resolute. "If we go forward with them, we're hypocrites. If we pull out, we lose time, money, maybe credibility." Maya nodded, her hands twisting together. "I know it's a mess," she said, "but I couldn't let it slide. Not after what we're building here." Lila met her gaze, a flicker of gratitude cutting through her frustration. "You did the right thing," she assured her. "This is on me to fix." She stood, pacing the cramped office, her mind churning through options. Canceling the contract meant scrambling for a new supplier. Nights of phone calls, renegotiations, and a hit to the budget she'd barely stabilized. But keeping it meant tainting Luxe Haven's fresh start with a lie. "We're done with them," she decided, stopping mid-step. "Monday we start over. Find someone who aligns with us. No compromises." Maya's eyes widened. "But the launch—" "We'll make it work," Lila cut in, her tone steel. "I'd rather delay than deceive." As Maya left to gather supplier contacts, Lila sank back into her chair, exhaustion tugging at her. The fight for integrity was relentless, and she felt it in her bones. Little did she know, another test was waiting downstairs, one wearing Ethan Carver's face, ready to stir the past into her fragile present. The clock hadn't yet struck opening time when Lila Jackson descended the stairs from her office, her mind still tangled in the supplier mess. Luxe Haven lay quiet, its racks aglow with the promise of a new day, until the front doors chimed. She froze mid-step, her breath catching as Ethan Carver shuffled in. He looked different, hair unkempt, suit replaced by a worn jacket, his usual swagger gone. His eyes darted around the store before settling on her, heavy with something she couldn't quite read. "Miss Jackson," he said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. I needed to see you." Lila's pulse quickened, the memory of his smug grin flashing hot. She crossed her arms, planting herself near the counter. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, her tone guarded but curious. He stepped closer, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words tumbling out like they'd been rehearsed. "Not just for that day, but for everything. How I acted, who I was." She blinked, caught off guard by the rawness in his voice. "I've been thinking," he went on, "about what you said, how I judged you, judged everyone. I didn't get it then, but I do now." Lila's defenses wavered, her anger clashing with a flicker of surprise. Was this real or just another play? Before she could respond, he dropped a bombshell. "I was wrong because I've been there, judged too. Growing up poor, I fought to fit in." Lila Jackson's eyes narrowed as Ethan's confession hung between them. the quiet of Luxe Haven amplifying its weight. "You," she said, skepticism sharpening her voice. "Judged?" Ethan nodded, his gaze dropping to the marble floor. "Yeah," he muttered. "Small town, no money. People looked at me like I was nothing. I clawed my way up. Thought this place made me somebody. Guess I turned into what I hated." His hands fidgeted, pulling at the frayed cuffs of his jacket. Lila felt a pang, anger mixed with something softer, unexpected. She'd pegged him as a born gatekeeper, not a man who'd once been locked out. She stepped closer, her voice steady but probing. "Why tell me this now?" Ethan met her eyes, a flicker of shame crossing his face. "Because losing this job, it broke me open," he said. "I've got no right to ask forgiveness, but I needed you to know I'm sorry. To the staff, too." His glance shifted past her, as if imagining them there. Lila's chest tightened. This wasn't the Ethan who'd sneered at her. It was a man stripped bare, fragile in a way she hadn't foreseen. "You're welcome here as a customer," she said finally, her tone softening. "Show me you mean it." He nodded, gratitude flashing in his eyes, then turned to leave, the door chiming behind him. As silence settled, Lila exhaled, the past and present colliding. Tomorrow's reopening loomed, and now she carried this new piece of Ethan into it, proof that even the hardest hearts could crack. Luxe Haven buzzed with a nervous energy as the clock ticked toward opening time, its glass doors polished to a mirror shine. Lila Jackson stood at the center of the transformed store, her eyes tracing the wider aisles, the local art on the walls, and the racks now brimming with diverse styles and sizes. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility, a stark contrast to the sterile exclusivity of weeks past. Maya Torres darted around, adjusting a display of Atlanta-made scarves, her smile bright despite the sleepless nights they'd all endured to pull this off. "It's really happening," she said, catching Lila's eye. Lila nodded, her chest tight with pride and a thread of unease. Today was the real test. The doors chimed, and the first customers trickled in, some regulars, others new faces, drawn by whispers of change. Then Ethan Carver stepped through, hesitant, clutching a small bag from a nearby coffee shop. Lila's breath caught, yesterday's apology still echoing in her mind. He offered a shy nod, holding up the bag. "Thought I'd bring something. For the team," he said, his voice low. She took it, surprised by the gesture, and waved him in. "Welcome back," she said, meaning it. As he browsed, Mrs. Evelyn Harper arrived, her silk scarf impeccable, her expression unreadable. Lila braced herself. Ethan's presence was a personal shift, but Evelyn's reaction could sway the old guard. The day stretched ahead, a tightrope of hope and resistance. The morning unfurled in Luxe Haven like a slow bloom, customers weaving through the reimagined space with a mix of awe and skepticism. Lila Jackson watched Ethan Carver linger near a rack of jackets, his fingers brushing the fabric as if testing his place here. He caught her eye and offered a faint smile, a fragile truce, before slipping into the crowd. Meanwhile, Maya guided a group of teens to the new affordable line, her enthusiasm infectious as they laughed and snapped photos. The staff moved with purpose, their training in inclusivity shining through every warm greeting, every patient suggestion. Lila felt the shift. This wasn't just a store anymore. It was a statement. But not everyone was convinced. Mrs. Evelyn Harper stood near the counter, her arms crossed, eyeing a display of bold, colorful dresses that defied the store's old monochrome elegance. "It's different," she said when Lila approached, her tone clipped but less hostile than before. "I'll give you that." Lila smiled, sensing an opening. "Different can be good," she replied. "Stay a while. See what we're about now." Evelyn huffed but didn't leave, her curiosity wrestling with habit. As the day wore on, a few old-timers walked out, grumbling about lost prestige, but twice as many newcomers filled the gaps, their chatter drowning out the dissent. Lila's hope grew, tempered by the knowledge that bigger battles, like the supplier switch, still loomed. Tonight's community event would seal this new chapter, and she needed every ally she could muster. Night fell over Buckhead, and Luxe Haven glowed like a beacon, its windows alive with color and sound. Lila Jackson stood at the store's heart, surrounded by a crowd spilling onto the sidewalk, Locals, designers, customers old and new, all gathered for the community event she'd poured her soul into. Tables showcased creations from Atlanta's underrepresented artists, their bold fabrics and handmade jewelry catching the light. Maya Torres darted between guests, her laughter ringing as she introduced a young designer to a curious shopper. The air thrummed with music and chatter, a celebration of the store's rebirth. Lila's chest swelled. This was her vision made real, a space where every voice mattered. Ethan Carver hovered near the edge, a volunteer badge pinned to his jacket, his hands busy setting out coffee cups. He'd shown up early, offering to help, and Lila had let him, sensing his quiet need for redemption. Their eyes met across the room, a nod passing between them. Not forgiveness yet, but a start. Then the crowd parted and Mrs. Evelyn Harper stepped forward, her silk scarf catching the glow of a nearby lamp. She held a microphone, her presence commanding silence. "I've shopped here for 30 years, she began, her voice steady but softer than Lila expected. "And I was wrong to think change meant loss. This," she gestured to the vibrant scene, "this is what luxury should be." A murmur rippled through the room, eyes turning to Lila, waiting for her to seal this moment. Mrs. Evelyn Harper's words hung in the air, a bridge between Luxe Haven's past and its future. Lila Jackson stepped forward, taking the microphone with a hand that trembled only slightly. The crowd hushed, their faces a tapestry of hope, skepticism, and pride. "Thank you, Evelyn," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This store was a battleground between who we were and who we could be. Tonight we've chosen the latter." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Maya, beaming with tears in her eyes, and Ethan, standing straighter now, a flicker of peace on his face. "We're not just selling clothes," and she continued. "We're building a place where everyone belongs, where luxury lifts us all." The room erupted in applause, a wave that crashed over Lila, washing away months of doubt. She announced a new partnership with local designers from marginalized communities, their work now a permanent fixture at Luxe Haven, a promise kept despite the supplier chaos. As the cheers faded, Ethan approached, his voice low. "I'm volunteering at a shelter now," he said, "trying to be better." Lila squeezed his arm. "Keep going," she replied, a quiet absolution. Outside, Atlanta's skyline glittered, mirroring the store's radiant lights. Lila stepped onto the sidewalk, alone for a moment, breathing in the night. This wasn't just a win, it was a revolution, small but seismic, rippling beyond Buckhead. The journey had ended here, but its echo would linger, a testament to what courage and unity could ignite.